get your brain wrapped around this subject, you find out that at the end of 2012, in an easy way to put it, the choices that we make become less and less consequential to the future. And eventually we're pushed into this bottleneck of time, no matter which choice we make. And that's important to the people that had access to Looking Glass, because they would use Looking Glass knowing the choices that they would make, and the future would pop up. The big mistake was coming up with the possibility of future. Something big was coming up. Something that made it so all the possibilities of all the future scenarios of any choice, any possibility that was fed in and observed through the Looking Glass inherently ended up in the same future. And no decision and no possibility changed past a certain point. That's the big secret.
Okay, so is that certainly 2012 in your understanding?
It well coincides with December 21st, 2012.
So at that point, all possibilities lead to the same
timelines.
Rubicon.
All possible timelines lead to the same basic set of history in the future.
And what is that history to you? Did you know that, or did you find that out?
That is the big question. That is the big secret. That is what sends everybody that has all of the information, that knows everything, into a blind panic. The people that know everything about Looking Glass, that have gotten all the reports and all the information, the elites of the world, probably figured out that that was the end of the game, and nothing could be manipulated beyond that point.
Okay, but at a certain point you said that even the powers that be, so to speak, realized that having even abilities such as yourself, you're talking about, which they, in theory, had even using a computer or a Looking Glass.
Right, they had to use a computer to do it.
Right, so in essence, but at a certain point, it's still an end game. It's still, they cannot go beyond a certain point.
At a certain point, after they're done hearing the computer tell them, this is what's going to happen, over and over and over and over again, all they become focused on is, how do we fix it?
Why? What is this that's going to happen?
The
you know that?
inevitable contraction of the timelines.
But what does that mean for this reality? Do you know that?
I don't know that. What I do know is that I was called in and asked to solve this problem, this timeline contraction problem. And I eventually did my due diligence and did all the investigating, and basically only had one piece of information, and that was reinforcement. The computer's right. The timelines will contract down to some inevitable thing that you guys won't tell me about, so I can't help you.
But it's, what you're basically, you came back with was, it is inevitable, whatever it is.
There is an inevitable event. It's been forecast, it's been predicted, it's been fed to us in a slop trough of what they want us to believe will happen.
But they don't actually
However,
know.
They don't actually have control over what happens. They only have control over the reaction, and it seems that no matter what they try to do to cause their desired reaction, it's going to have an opposite effect.
Interesting.
Now, it's much, much easier for me to explain today what that process is as opposed to back then. But if I had to give it a name, I would say it's the awakening process. It's an evolution of consciousness that cannot, will not, and no matter what decisions or possibilities are injected into the equation, eventually it all resolves down to us all learning the truth and becoming aware of this massive dam of lies that has been built that keep us from knowing massive volume of information that we should otherwise possess.
Okay, well, that's very, very monumental to be told that from a person in your perspective, who's had your background and your exposure. Is it your understanding that the notion that Looking Glass has been, you know, that there are various looking glasses around the globe supposedly, that according to Dan Burish were shut down. Is it your understanding they're actually not shut down?
I believe that they're shut down because they are all saying the same thing, and
So it's like
they're
they've-
completely
they're
useless at this
redundant,
point.
is what you're saying.
Right. It's like the Wicked Witch, you know, looking into the, you know, magic mirror and always getting the same answer. Well, if you were always getting the exact opposite of the answer that you wanted, you'd stop talking to the mirror. And that's essentially what happened with Looking Glass, is no longer, not only did they not want people to use it anymore because they knew it was just going to burp out the same thing, but at the same time they didn't want anybody else to know what it was saying, I'm sure. Because,
That they would lose control.
because
in
that
essence.
information was of a monumental concern when I was in the military about how to prevent this inevitability. Now, at first I thought it was end of the world. Now I see end of the world as end of their world.
People in high places, you know, politically, would use this to try to see their most optimum future and then follow those. So they were using it to enhance their wealth, et cetera,
Yeah.
in a very egotistical way. And that was part of the problem with it. And that,
for all intents and purposes, what we believe to be true eventually becomes true. If somebody convinces us that a major disaster is going to happen in the very near future, a major disaster happens in the very near future. If we don't buy into that fear and accept that there is really nothing that we know is going to happen, and accept of whatever happens, that makes the convergence of the timelines happen as naturally as possible. The game, both players know the game is over. It's only a matter of time before he does this, and then you're forced to do this, and then he's forced to do this, and eventually checkmate. We, as a race, if we could understand that the game is over, that based on the rules of the game, the bad guys have already lost, the good guys have already won. Yes, there's moves left on the table, but those moves are being forced by the player that is going to win. The only way that checkmate can't happen is if the player that's winning makes a mistake. But from all of the information that I've gathered, all of the information that's been given, all of the information that's been vetted to me, it seems pretty obvious that the good guy player on the side of the chessboard knows exactly what has to be done to win the game. And so at this point, any mistake would be all but impossible. But again, you really have to understand the game to know that the guy that's losing is lost. And I'm sure most people sitting watching a chess match between two advanced chess players know the game's over long after the two players know it's over, because they can't see the board and see that there's only 7 moves left.
Okay, but when we come to this convergence, and again, you've seen, or the looking glass has seen up to that point.
Now, let me say why I believe that it comes down to one inevitability, is because I was entrusted in getting it down to 2 possibilities. And I've heard both of those possibilities talked about in massive proportions, the good and the bad.
Okay, do you want to talk, so can you, in one sentence, say what the good was and the bad was, or are you able to do that?
To most easily put it to people,
I suppose.
one scenario is what most people would understand to be ascension, or an evolution of consciousness that brings us out of the cocoon and turns us into a butterfly. Timeline 2 is some kind of major global catastrophe that drives most of us underground and leaves a few of us on top to fend for ourselves.